The alarms inside ADX Florence began screaming at 2:14 a.m., slicing through the cold Colorado night like a warning no one wanted to hear. Red lights flashed down the empty concrete hallways, and the steel doors automatically locked even tighter, clamping shut with heavy clacks that sounded like they were sealing the whole building inside a giant metal tomb. Every officer on the midnight shift froze. Something impossible had just happened. One of the sensors, one of the 7 security layers that were supposed to make the prison untouchable, had tripped. And the name flashing on the control room screen made every guard shake. Marcus Hale, the gang commander who was supposed to be locked inside the most secure cell in the United States. A man who had already controlled riots in other prisons just by speaking through air vents. A man the FBI called a one-man security breach. His cell door was still closed. The cameras showed no one inside the hallway. The motion detectors showed nothing moving in the pod. The thermal sensors showed no heat signatures out of place. Everything looked normal. But one line on the screen kept blinking red, over and over. Layer 4 breach detected. Marcus Hale, red zone. A guard whispered, "That can't be real, no one gets through Layer 4. But the system didn't lie. Someone, or something, had triggered a level of security that had never been touched by an inmate in the history of ADX Florence. And whatever caused it was happening right now, inside a prison built to stop every kind of danger known to man. Everyone stared at the camera feed of Marcus's cell, waiting for a movement, a shadow, anything. But the screen showed only a man sitting calmly on the edge of his concrete bed, staring at the wall like nothing was happening. Then Marcus turned his head slowly toward the camera. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just lifted one finger and tapped his own neck 3 times. The guards stepped back from the monitors, their hearts pounding. They had no idea what the gesture meant, but it wasn't random. Marcus Hale never did anything random. And then, the camera feed glitched, a black flash filling the screen for less than a second before it came back again. In that single second, Marcus was no longer sitting on the bed. He was now standing in the center of the cell. Not moving, not speaking, just staring directly into the camera. "What did he just do?" a guard whispered. Nobody answered. Nobody could. Because no one in ADX Florence had ever seen Marcus Hale move that fast. No one had ever seen a camera glitch inside a Supermax pod. And no one could explain how a man locked behind 7 layers of security had triggered a breach in a place where escape was supposed to be physically impossible. The watch commander swallowed hard, stepped forward, and said the only words anyone could say. "Get the warden. Now." And as the guards started running, something even stranger happened. Marcus lifted his hand slowly and pointed at the exact security camera watching him. Then he mouthed 2 silent words. "Layer 5. And that was the moment every guard understood. Whatever was happening inside ADX Florence tonight was not normal, was not accidental, was not something they had prepared for. Marcus Hale had planned something, and one of the 7 layers had already fallen. But no one knew how, and no one knew what was about to fall next. The commander whispered, "Dear God, what did he do?" Before anyone could answer, every light in the control room flickered, and the chapter ends here. But the story is only just beginning. Hours earlier, before the alarms, before the glitch, before the nightmare started, ADX Florence was as quiet as a frozen mountain. Most nights in the Supermax were like that, silent, still, and cold enough to make your breath look like smoke when you exhaled. The prison sat miles away from any major city, surrounded by open land, tall fences, and more cameras than an airport. To understand what went wrong that night, you have to understand what ADX Florence was built for and why men like Marcus Hale were sent there. Most prisons are made to hold people. ADX Florence is made to control people. Because the men inside it are not just dangerous, they are dangerous even when locked inside a concrete box alone for 23 hours a day. They lead gangs from inside prison. They order crimes on the outside. They make phone calls with hidden codes. They slip messages through cracks, through pipes, through guards who get scared or bribed. Marcus Hale was one of those men. He didn't need weapons. He didn't need money. All he needed was a word. And because he was a commander of one of the most feared prison gangs in the United States, a gang known for violence, coordination, and absolute loyalty, even locking him up didn't stop him. At least, it didn't before ADX. That was why, after 2 major incidents in other prisons where Marcus had somehow reached the outside world, the Bureau of Prisons made a decision. Move him to ADX Florence. Seal him behind 7 layers of security. Cut him off from every voice, every ally, every possibility. But tonight, clearly, they had miscalculated. The story of how Marcus ended up there started years earlier, inside a medium-security prison in New Mexico. Back then, Marcus wasn't famous. He wasn't feared nationwide. He was just another inmate, smart, quiet, and observant. He watched the other prisoners, studied the guards, memorized routines, and learned which gangs controlled which parts of the yard. And he noticed something that changed his life. The gangs didn't just control the inmates. They controlled the guards. They controlled the phones. They controlled the information. One day in the yard, a small argument broke out between two inmates from different gangs. The officers rushed toward them, trying to calm it down, but Marcus wasn't watching the fight. He was watching who moved, who whispered, who signaled, who traded glances. The fight wasn't about anger. It was a message, a move, a test, a way to see who reacted and who didn't. Marcus realized that the real power in prison wasn't in muscles or violence. It was in understanding the patterns behind everything. And once he saw that truth, he never stopped studying. Within a year, he had become a problem. Within 2 years, he had become a threat. Within 3 years, he was commanding people who outranked him, older men, larger men, men with records twice as long. By year 4, Marcus Hale wasn't following orders anymore. He was giving them. And no one understood how a man with no tattoos, no flashy attitude, and no history of gang life suddenly became the one person everyone listened to. But Marcus didn't need to shout. His plans worked so well that people followed him without question. When a man's plan gets you fed, protected, and respected, he becomes a leader. But Marcus didn't stop there. He reached outside the yard, outside the prison, outside the state. He created a network that connected inmates from different prisons, different gangs, and different corners of the country. His messages were coded through letters, drawings, conversations, and even the timing of when people walked across the yard. He built a system the officials couldn't understand. Until they did. When the FBI intercepted a set of coded letters linking Marcus to violent orders issued across 3 states, everything changed. Suddenly, he wasn't just another prisoner. He was a national-level threat. And national-level threats go only one place. ADX Florence. But before they moved him there, something happened. Something that would come back years later. Something the guards at ADX still didn't know. Marcus learned something about prison security. Something about how systems worked. Something about how systems failed. Something he should never have known. And that is the real beginning of this story. Because the night the alarms went off at 2:14 a.m., it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't random. It was connected to something Marcus learned years before. Something hidden inside the 7 layers of security. But the guards didn't know that yet. And as they rushed down the hallway toward Marcus's pod, their boots echoing on the smooth concrete floor, they had no idea that the moment they reached his door, something even worse would happen. Because just as they turned the final corner, Layer 5 failed, and the lights went out. For 3 full seconds, ADX Florence, the prison built to never go dark, was swallowed in total blackness. No hallway lights, no emergency lamps, no white glow from the cameras. Nothing. Just pure darkness. The guards who had been running toward Marcus Hale's pod stopped mid-stride, their boots sliding on the concrete floor as they reached out blindly, searching for the wall. Several shouted to one another, but their voices bounced down the hallway, echoing so strangely that it became hard to tell where anyone was. "Stay calm," the watch commander yelled, but even he could hear the fear scraping the edge of his voice. ADX Florence was designed so that its power systems could not fail together. They were built in layers, just like the 7 layers of security that protected the inmates from the outside world and protected the outside world from the inmates. But now, somehow, Layer 5, the system tied to smart locks, pressure plates, and backup lights, had been knocked out. And that wasn't just rare. It was impossible. A faint low hum began vibrating through the floor, like something was slowly waking up under the concrete. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, and it made every guard's chest rattle. "What's that noise?" an officer whispered. No one answered. They were all thinking the same thing. If Layer 5 had failed, what about Layer 6? Before anyone could ask out loud, the lights burst back on with a sharp, white flash. Some of the guards blinked wildly, others covered their eyes. The hallway was bright again, too bright, almost, and the sound of reopening electrical lines crackled above their heads. Everything looked normal. Everything looked intact. Except for one thing. A thin red line was now glowing on the ceiling, something none of the guards had ever seen before. It ran straight down the hallway, like a laser line marking the center of the corridor. What is that? One officer breathed. But the commander didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Marcus Hale's pod door. Because wherever that red line ended, it ended right at Marcus's cell. The door was still shut. The bolts were still locked. The cameras were back online, showing Marcus standing perfectly still in the center of his room. But something had changed. He wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking at the door. And he was smiling. Not a wide smile. Not a crazy smile. It was the worst kind of smile. A calm, patient one. Like everything happening was part of a plan he had written years ago. The commander's voice shook as he lifted the radio. Control room, confirm status of Layer 5. We just saw. A loud beep cut him off. Every guard froze. The beep didn't come from the radio. It came from the pod door. Marcus's pod door. The tiny screen above the lock flickered red, then green, then red again. That wasn't normal. Those colors only changed during system checks, and the system was not supposed to be running any checks right now. Step back, the commander ordered. The guards moved into defensive positions, forming two lines on either side of the hallway, leaving the center open in case the door suddenly opened. But it didn't. Instead, something far stranger happened. 15 minutes earlier, before the lights went out, before Layer 5 failed, before Marcus smiled at the pod door, another part of ADX Florence had been waking up. It was the remote monitoring center, a room nobody outside the highest levels of security ever got to see. It wasn't even located inside the main prison building. It sat under a separate structure, connected through fiber lines and temperature-controlled tubes that ran beneath the ground like metal veins. Two technicians were working the night shift that evening. They weren't guards. They weren't law enforcement. They were civilians who had undergone years of background checks to be allowed near the system that guarded the Supermax's deepest layers. Their names were Evan Carter and Dana Ruiz. Both of them were half asleep, sipping cold coffee, staring at screens full of blinking dots and moving lines. The systems weren't exciting. They weren't supposed to be. Nothing ever changed down here. Until tonight. Dana was the first to see it. A small box in the corner of her screen flashed yellow, then red. Evan, look at this, she said, leaning forward. He rolled over in his chair, not expecting much. What now? Another false temperature alert. No. It's coming from. Dana froze. It's coming from Layer 3. Evan blinked. Layer 3 as in the. Yes, Dana whispered. The vibration sensors. Evan sat up straight. That's impossible. Dana's hands hovered over her keyboard, unsure whether to touch anything. The screen was showing a clear reading. Vibration anomaly, Pod C, Cell 11. Evan leaned in. Cell 11, that's Marcus Hale. He swallowed. Nobody wanted anything to happen in Marcus Hale's cell. Nobody. Dana typed fast, running a second check, a third check, a manual reset. Each test came back the same. Something inside Marcus's cell had triggered a vibration readout, but only for 1 single second. Did he hit the wall? Evan asked. No, Dana said. Too light for that. Too quick. Did something fall? No. Then what? A second alert flashed. This time not from Layer 3. Layer 4, pressure plate shift. Evan and Dana stared at the screen in disbelief. His alone, Evan said. How can there be 2 pressure readings? His one man. Dana whispered, unless he's not the one causing it. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the lights flickered. Everything went black. They both lunged for their flashlights, but by the time the beams hit the room, every computer screen had frozen on the same message. Override signal, unknown source. And that was the moment they realized. Someone had accessed the deep layers of ADX Florence. Someone who shouldn't exist. Someone who was not inside the prison. Dana's voice shook. Call the warden. Now. Back in Marcus's hallway, the red line on the ceiling stopped glowing. The strange flicker on the pod door screen ended. Everything seemed to settle. But no one trusted it. The commander spoke into his radio again. Control, we need Layer 6 status. Confirm no breaches. Confirm no. The radio crackled violently, drowning out his voice with static so loud it made several guards wince. Then, through the static, a single sound emerged. A click. Just one. It echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the thick concrete walls. Click. Every guard turned toward Marcus's pod door again. The door hadn't moved. The locks were still in place. But something behind the door had made that sound. A shift. A snap, a lock releasing from the inside. The commander whispered, "That's not possible." Marcus took one step forward inside his cell. Not fast, not threatening. His foot touched the floor softly, but the sound echoed like thunder through the hallway. "Marcus Hale," the commander shouted, trying to sound brave. "Stand down. Step away from the door." Marcus didn't move back. He didn't raise his hands. He simply tilted his head like a man listening to music nobody else could hear. The commander tried again. "You are being monitored. All layers are active." Marcus smiled faintly. Then he mouthed a single word. "No." The guards raised their weapons. Not to shoot, just to be ready. But they never got the chance to aim. Because at that exact moment, Layer 6 failed. The sound wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a crash. It was worse. It was a soft, gentle thud, like a giant heartbeat moving through the entire building. Then the floor under the guards' boots vibrated. The walls trembled. The air changed temperature, dropping so fast that several guards felt their skin prickle. And one by one, every cell door in the pod made the same faint clicking sound. Not opening, not unlocking, but preparing. That was when the emergency siren overhead began to blare, louder than anything the guards had ever heard. It wasn't the normal alarm. This one was deeper, shaking the air, designed only for one event. Multi-layer security failure, code black. Guards froze. Weapons ready. Eyes wide. Marcus took another slow step toward the door. The commander shouted, "Fall back. Fall back." But it was too late. Because just then, the reinforced glass window on Marcus's pod, a window designed to survive explosions, fires, and even high-caliber rounds, cracked. A thin, spiderweb-shaped fracture spread across it like ice on a winter pond. Every guard stared in horror. The glass wasn't supposed to crack. Nothing in ADX Florence was supposed to crack. Marcus placed his hand gently on the inside of the glass. Not punching, not hitting, just touching. And the crack spread. Fast. Too fast. The guards stepped back, weapons trembling in their hands. The commander's voice broke. "Everybody move. Now." Because for the first time in the history of ADX Florence, a cell window was breaking.